Welcome everyone to another edition of the Mars Bunker. I am pleased to be joined today by Artemis Westenberg, who has served as president of Explore Mars Incorporated for 9 years, from 2010 to 2019, and is also a veteran of many simulated Mars missions with the Mars Society, and of course a long-term advocate of human missions to Mars with decades of valuable experience. Great to have you here today.
It's great to be here.
So last week, we looked at the Fermi paradox and whether this can provide any key insights into the importance of human missions to the Red Planet. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the steps taking place right now here on Earth, teaching us the valuable lessons that we will need to prepare for a sustained human presence on Mars. The two of us are going to be taking questions from you all throughout today's live stream. And if you're watching the recording, you can just comment down below and I will more than happily answer your questions. So let's take a look at where you are all tuning in from today. So let's see. I see we have Craig coming in from Hawaii. We have Hawk from Virginia, people coming in from Scotland. And I even see we have some of my fellow compatriots. Hi there, Adam, from the UK. Great to see you all here today. So I wanted to start, Artemis. Could you tell us a little bit about your background? So obviously you've been campaigning for sending humans to Mars for a lot longer than most of us. I've only been in this game for about 6 or 7 years. So what was it that first sparked your interest in Mars and specifically sending humans there?
It actually was serendipity. In 2000, over the internet, I was discussing hard science fiction books. With someone I had just met, Franz Bloch. He is a longtime friend since. And he recommended the trilogy of Kim Stanley Robinson, Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars, and some other stuff. And he also told me that he was instrumental in the website of the Mars Society in the Netherlands and that it still needed to be officially founded and needed an official board. And so I said, you have a founding meeting. Can I be there? The rest is history. That's basically what happened. And I there and then became the public relations officer for the Mars Society. I had been public relations officer for various multinational corporations in the Netherlands. So I did have experience in that. I had a lot of experience in advocacy, but then advocacy for women's rights over 20 years. And, and so you start. And then, from there on, you start to really push for it because I'm a very, very practical person. I was born and raised in Rotterdam, and Rotterdam people in the Netherlands are known to be extremely practical. No words, but deeds is what we sing for our local soccer club. And that's how my life is. So, if I want something, I always realize that unless you start to do something, it's just wishful thinking.
And absolutely. And when it comes to pushing forward such a hugely monumental agenda as sending humans to Mars, you need to have a practical mindset to actually get this achieved. You did mention there about hard science fiction, in particular the Mars trilogy, which is one of my favorite trilogies. So for anyone who's not familiar with the terminology, hard science fiction is science fiction that really endeavors to get the science right. So there aren't any magical technologies. Often you see things like warp drives in science fiction, but we don't quite get into it, but there's various physics-based objections to that. But the Mars trilogy really focuses a lot on the science of terraforming, which is where the whole Red Mars, Blue Mars, Green Mars trilogy comes from. And in fact, I think I just noticed in the background behind you, you have a flag that seems to be depicting this whole process of transforming Mars into a habitable planet.
Yes,
but of course, there's a lot of steps to get there. So,
true. And yes, it's the red, green, and blue Mars flag behind me, because I always felt that for me to go to Mars, it's not about conquering a piece of land. I couldn't care less. For me, it's about establishing a new and better society. And I believe that we have a good chance of being very far from big multinational corporations and governments, but it's especially, I think, the corporations, to really start afresh and be more gentle with each other, in the sense that we do not judge people on skin color or weight or age or, lowly job, because every job on Mars will be instrumental in keeping us alive. I believe we have a chance to get it right this time. And that's why I am, sporting this flag, because I felt that if you have a new society and a new country in a way, it should have its own flag to say, this is what we are.
And I really like this idea about having a fresh start on Mars, to be able to, we have the collective wisdom of all the societies throughout human history that have either worked or not worked. We can see what works well, what doesn't work well, and we have a chance to implement perhaps something new on Mars from first principles that might work a lot better. And we'll get on to that slightly later in the show. But I wanted to start by looking at the big picture here. So Explore Mars Inc. in particular has prioritized and flagged this target date of pushing to send the first humans to Mars in 2033. And I read a fascinating interview with you recently that recounted a story of you being in a meeting where you asked everyone to get out their calendars and set in the date. It wasn't a meeting. Well, perhaps you can tell us more about it directly.
Yeah, the thing is, if you hold the Mars conference for the world every year in Washington and the Washington University, and everyone who is anyone, the big honchos of big industry, space industry, but also of NASA and other, and academia, but also European or, Japanese space agency and all these others, if they come together, the leaders of space, and you are the president of an organization, you are quite naturally the one to introduce your keynote speaker, who is supposed to then, open officially the conference. So I think about, the first conference I did in 2013, I don't think I really milked that fact that I could, point the conference somewhere. But in 2015, I most definitely did. Oh, by the way, I did milk it in some way in 2013, and that worked as well. Because I will tell you what I did. In 2013, I looked at the room, realized that basically who is who of the world of Mars and space exploration was sitting in front of me. And I acknowledged that. I told my room, I realized that you are the best of the best, the brightest minds in space exploration are right here in front of me. Good. I have homework for you. 3 days from now, I will hear from you whether this idea of putting humans on Mars is, a pipe dream or it is possible. And if it's not possible, I want you also to tell me, what we're lacking, what technology or whatever is, our problem. And I could tell when I said that people were looking at each other like, yeah, we want to do this, but we all know it's not possible. It's just, a nice idea and we really want to push this. But 3 days later, to their own surprise, they came back with, yes, Mars is hard, but doable. With a message like that, you go to Congress and you say, hey, the experts of the world tell me that it's possible. How about it? And now in 2015, again, I opened a conference and I had prepared it in this case with like 4 slides. And so I open, I say, great, you're all here, people online, people in the room, wonderful. I take it, everyone has an electronic calendar nowadays. Great, take it out. And there I was standing at the podium waiting for people to do that. And people were like, she's serious? Okay. They were taking their phones or their iPads or their computer or their laptops, they're opening them up. And I was waiting. And when I thought, waiting long enough, everyone has what they want, I did click and it said behind me, it said, here humans set foot on Mars for the first time, 6th of October, 2033. And I said to everyone, note that date. 6th of October, 2033. And here's the leadership of Lockheed Martin, of Aerojet Rocketry, honestly putting that date in their calendar, which was, kind of funny. And but it wasn't, it was funny to see it done, but it wasn't meant as being funny at all. Why did I do it? Because we have been talking about we're going to Mars in 20 years time, and this 20 years keeps being 20 years, 20 years, 20 years, 20 years. And so I thought someone has to be forceful enough to say, okay, this is it, this is the date. And so they did it, and there were some. There are senators that run with this date now. It became the date in many ways for the whole program, and ever since I talked to Congress in America, which is always kind of amazing, because I'm telling Congress of the United States what to do, and I'm not even an American. But don't tell them that. They kind of figure it out because my accent isn't really American enough, but who cares? And they never ask, actually, so fine. If they don't ask, I don't tell. If they ask, I honestly say I'm not an American. But if they don't ask, that's it. And so I kept pushing this date and this year especially, because it's a good year for a short commute. I honestly called it a commute the last time I spoke to Congress, to Mars, because it will be a bit over 6 months. 2033 is also that if we miss the launch window, and this is a very hard and difficult undertaking, it will not be easy to get it right and on time. We actually are not wasting all this money, because 2035 is even a better year with even a shorter trip, with the way we are doing it now, no warp drive. And so I told Congress, if you aim for that, that you're not going to waste all the money you spend on it, because then 2035 will most certainly be possible. If you miss the window in 2033, 2035 is what you'll do. And so
to clarify, when you talk about 2033, are you talking about an orbital mission to Mars or boots on the ground?
No. Personally, I'm talking about boots on the ground. I know that now people are talking about an orbital mission, but I always wonder, how does that work? You fly all the way for 6 months to Mars, then you circle Mars a few times, like Apollo 8 did the moon. And then you take 20 months to fly back.
It feels like such a waste. Obviously, there are interesting things to explore about.
It's for the health of the astronauts. That's actually more dangerous than being on the surface of Mars. That said, landing on the surface of Mars with humans is not that easy. So I don't know.
So one thing I want to touch about with this date. So I read a report last year by the Science and Technology Policy Institute that was casting doubt about the feasibility, at least of NASA via a traditional process, of even doing an orbital mission by 2037. In their words, I think they said even without budget constraints, because of how long it would take to develop the technology. And so I was curious the extent to which these new developments, like new space organizations like Blue Origin and SpaceX, new technologies like reusable rocketry, might help to accelerate a meter date like 2033. And in particular, I saw we had a question, although I seem to have lost it somewhere. Here we go. So this was effectively along the same route from Jetsons. And I see we have two different uses of Artemis there, which is quite funny, as to whether new systems like SpaceX's Starship could help achieve these goals that we have in space exploration.
Well, being Explore Mars and not the American government or the European government, I actually personally don't care which rocket we use. I mean, and the fact that we will probably soon have two rocket systems capable of going into space is a bonus. I mean, I like redundancy. Everyone likes redundancy, especially with it's something as difficult as this is. And so, yeah, we might. I don't know. And this whole idea of reusing rockets, let's face it, we don't throw away our airplanes either once we arrive in Sydney. So, it's I think it's the future. Whether it's too soon for that future is very hard to say. I actually remember Elon Musk before he started SpaceX. So, because he was at a Mars Society conference as one of the speakers, and there we found out, why, he was so interested in giving a speech. So, and if you see how far he has come in 18 years, that guy that everyone laughed about, him building rockets, then I think, it's hard to say it's impossible. I'm not saying it isn't hard or a tight schedule, for the mid to 2030s, but unless you set a date and say, now I'm going to really work for it, it's going to be another 20 years and another 20 years.
Absolutely. And we see this same kind of philosophy. For example, this question from Akem about whether 2024 you could do it. So just to clarify, that is often what Elon Musk and SpaceX say they're targeting. But it's a similar thing to what you describe. If you set a target date, even if it's incredibly ambitious, but you work towards it, if it then slips a few times, you then still meet your target of, say, 2031, 2033, etc. So it's encouraging to see that companies are also doing a similar approach to what you described, where they set a target date and then work tirelessly towards it. So
it's the only way, I think.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of things that we need to figure out in advance, not just on the technology side, if we want to meet a target like this 2033 date. And one of them that has been very encouraging to see a lot is simulated Mars missions. So sometimes you get organized, like governments doing it, like there was the Mars 500 experiment. But I've always been very impressed by seeing the activities.
Without any women. You realize that? The Russians didn't want any women, and so it ended without any women.
And I have also seen some experiments, though, that have looked at, full women composition crews as well. And my understanding is that from psychological experiments that mixed crew compositions tend to be the most stable. But if you've heard something else, that would be.
No, as being a CapCom for many, many years of the Mars Desert Research Station, then being, working the most days as CapCom for the Flashline Mars Arctic Research Station mission in 2007, or 4.5 months, then, being the mission director for the Mars analog stations of the Mars Society, I have learned that a all male or all female crew is not a good idea, neither. For different reasons, but none of them is a good idea. Having a mixed crew is tapping in to more knowledge and more experience and more backgrounds, and you need all those because you need the ingenuity of people. But the ingenuity of people stems from your upbringing and your social surroundings. And it's not just your brain, but it's also all the things your brain has learned and has seen and has read and has heard spoken about. And so if you can tap in that, you'll be better served, which means male and female crews. Also, if NASA is involved, and it's safe to say that it will be, the system of tax money in the United States make it impossible for a one gender crew, whether it will be all female or all male. Simply not allowed.
So you mentioned there that you obviously have extensive experience as both CapCom and mission director, and that you've also served in some of these missions yourself. Beyond what you said about the importance for the mission of the skill sets of having mixed crews, I'm curious what the key lessons or takeaways that you've experienced are in terms of what works well and what doesn't work well, and how we can use these lessons for real missions to Mars in the future.
Well, what I have found, and I think that many people don't realize that, even psychiatrists and psychologists, is that if you have a crew that is very friendly, that have become fast friends, you actually have a less working crew than if you have those that have more, are a bit more distant. The thing is, if you're this close with each other and working 24/7 and years together, then it is important that you give people privacy and give people space. I always tell people, privacy is not a right, it is something that is accorded to you by others. And doing that means that if you are not that, that very close friends, then you will have less of an inclination to step into this circle that all of us have around us. That that you get too close. That's fine for your brother whom you dearly love, but not 24/7 also. And so I have found that if crews are behave like on professional capacity with each other, so it's the communicator, it's the engineer, and so your whole interaction is based on your job, then the moment some of us get depressed because you're lonely, you're far away from your family, or whatever reason it is that you need some perking up as a human being, then it will be easy for that professional crew member to step into your inner circle, be that comfort to you, and then step back again. And those crews work best. That's it.
That's a very interesting point that you raise about almost having a family unit seems to be the crew that works best, as opposed to a rigid structure.
No, actually, it's the other way around.
Oh, okay.
If you're too close friends, it doesn't work.
So there's a balance to be established here.
Yeah, it needs to be. You're like, I don't know, soldiers on a mission. That's what you are, and that's your interaction. And so one is the captain, and one is the engineer, and all the different jobs. And so you interact with each other on that level. But the moment, because this crew rotation will be many months, even if we don't circle Mars and don't land. And then you need, this human connection as well. And if you train for a long, long time, I'm pretty sure you will be able to give that to your fellow crew member, but then you will be more inclined to step back and leave the personal bubble around this person again, and leave everyone and each of one of us their personal space. And that last thing is really important.
So building off this question here, most of the Mars simulation missions tend to be very small crews, like 4 to 6 people, where it's very easy to build that kind of personal connection that you just described. How do we do this if you have something like the system that SpaceX are developing that could send up to 100 people in one go? How do you ensure that people have those kind of personal connections with much larger groups?
Well, 20 to 100 people is still a very small village, to be honest. I mean, if I would only live in this town that I live with 100 people or even 200 people, everyone would know each other. Ask the people in Iceland. There are 300,000, and I think everyone knows everyone. So it's, it's not that hard, actually. Also, the whole numbers game has to do with how many people can we send in one capsule with enough food, with enough other supplies that they really need to survive, which means that the crew will be smaller. There's another observation. The crew should at minimum be 6. 4 is not enough. Why? And actually Houston Space Center agrees with me on this. If you have only 4, then each and every individual needs to have too many expertise, fields of expertise. And, that's humanly not really possible. So, and also there's no redundancy. What if I die? Then suddenly there are only 3. And then you probably really miss out on some vital function that I knew, and nobody else was an expert on that level. So 6 to ensure that there is mission success and also ensure the highest likelihood that people will return to Earth safely is the minimum. However, the crew capsule that's being built cannot bring 6 people, including food supplies, to Mars. And of course, we will send vehicles with extra food and all the other stuff to Mars at the same time or just before them. The thing is, though, we cannot be completely certain that nothing will go wrong with these other vehicles. So we have to send them with enough food and everything in their own capsule, in their own lander, to ensure that they have the best possible chance to survive. And so this is a problem. This is a conundrum.
And we see this often when, in early missions to Mars, like the Spirit and Opportunity rovers, you would send multiple copies of the same mission to guarantee success. And with something like where you need to make sure that you have the food and supplies for a human mission, you don't want to be in a situation where some of the supply missions fail, you've already launched the people, and then it's a disaster. And so this important point about making sure you have multiple redundancy, not just for the materials and the resources you have, but with crew skill sets, as you said, with small crews of 4 not being able to do it. Multiple redundancy is really key here. I just wanted to backtrack a little bit to this question from Joe about, so obviously there's a lot of talk about missions to the moon at the moment with NASA's Artemis program. And Joe makes an interesting point here about if we get the moon for free in developing the technology to go to Mars. That seems to be the point that Joe's making there. So do you think there's a role? Do you think moon missions are a distraction from Mars missions, or that they're important as a stepping stone along the way?
Well, I can assure Joe that anything we are building right now is actually for Mars, with the emphasis on Mars, and then we try to also use it on the moon. So it's the other way around. The nasty thing with the moon and Mars, though, is they are very, very different beasts. The regolith is completely different. The fact that you have absolutely no atmosphere and some atmosphere on Mars makes it different how to land there. There's so many differences. And how do I know so well? Because I'm not an expert, but I was sitting in as a note taker during a workshop with the experts on the moon and on Mars. They work together. And almost 2 years ago, I think it was. And we found that there is a short list of stuff you can develop that can be used both on the moon and Mars, but it's a short list. Probably a pressurized rover, although the wheels might need to be different. Probably some other stuff, but the most important stuff that you can develop for both is the way to communicate while on the surface of the moon or on Mars. But suits, the way you mitigate the dust of the moon or the dust of Mars, it doesn't have the same clinginess, the same properties. So there's actually, like I said, the list is short, regrettably. So anyone who thinks we go to the moon and we test everything and then we go to Mars is regrettably mistaken. And we have to really make sure that what we build will be built for either or. And because the Mars mission has been funded since 2014, we're actually in a better position of everything we're already building for Mars than for the moon. By the way, anyone saying we go to the moon, really? How many dollars did the US Congress give Trump for his Artemis missions? Anyone guess?
I won't give the number.
Zero. Absolutely zero. It's one of the ways that I know that even if we look at the United States and we see, and our newspapers in the Netherlands or perhaps also in the UK are telling us, yes, Trump has such a large group of people in Congress and in the Senate that are really behind him. Well, when it comes to money, you can suddenly see that money talks. And so they didn't give him money.
So I want to touch on one aspect. So you've mentioned a few times, like we going to the moon, we going to Mars, and you mentioned the examples of the political situation in the US at the moment. I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about the international aspect for organizing missions to Mars. And in fact, we had a question just recently from Justin again about this, about whether it's necessary to bring together different space agencies in order to reach a goal like sending people to Mars. So what role is there for international cooperation in realizing the vision of sending people to Mars?
Well, in Europe, I believe, Europe is as wealthy as the United States, as highly technological as the United States. The only difference in space exploration is that some stuff we haven't done before. And yes, we do not have human-rated rockets ourselves, because we believe you can always, rent a cab. That's basically how we look at it. And so we never spend the money on building our own rockets because we felt that either the Russians or the Americans would do that for us. Why, spend money on that? Now, what we in Europe are good at, though, is laser communications, is CubeSats. And so I actually am privy to the fact that there is a real plan now to have a government fund. I can't give you more specifics, but I really know the specifics. CubeSats to Mars, to have a GPS system ready there when the next rovers arrive. It will be a few years, so not the next rover, but later rovers, and especially ready when humans will arrive there. And also this laser communication, big satellites, so not a CubeSat, would be great in giving us much better bandwidth for the communications, the data sets, not just for humans, also for all our landers and rovers. And so the whole idea that like the ISS, we just be, a little partner with the United States. I'm pushing for that not to be the truth, for us in Europe to bring our expertise to the table and not be a partner in some of the stuff, but simply say, we will give you the GPS, we will give you the bandwidth. And there are some companies that are really very good and already quite developed in a pressurized rover for humans, either on the moon or Mars. Because like I said before, that's the one thing that might be useful for both. And so my push at the European Parliament and the European Committee is to fund that, and so be a vitally important partner in this whole undertaking, and not just be part of the whole budget, but have our own budget and just make these important parts of the mission. The same other countries, and of course I can't speak for Japan or Russia, but I do believe there is a chance that this is the way we will organize it, so that if we say humans set foot here and we came for all mankind, we actually will be coming from all mankind, not just for, but also from all mankind.
Do you think there's a prospect of also, in terms of involving everyone, engaging China and having them involved in this? Because I know historically there's been issues with that, and they're doing amazing things with their own space agency.
Yeah, NASA and China, I mean, there are political reasons why they can't cooperate the way we Europeans can. And the fact that we will be part of this, I do believe we Europeans will be part of this, is that there is a chance that we will simply, really co-opt with China. Of course, with what's happening right now, with the pandemic and the tension between countries, tensions between Europe and China, also, it's hard to say what will exactly happen. But I think there's a fair chance they will come. And of course, if we're talking human spaceflight, actually the largest amount of knowledge is probably with the Russians, even more so than with the Americans. As long as we bring enough money, I think the Kazakhstan and all the others are willing to partake in a effort like this.
So we had a question for you come in from another space nut here about whether you could tell us a little bit about SpaceWorks.
SpaceWorks, my personal company?
Yes.
Well, I needed a personal company to be a freelancer. And I thought that was a cool name, especially since most of the communications or other work I do has some relation with space. Not in the sense that I will ever build hardware, but doing strategical marketing or communications or all the other things, organizing conferences, giving lessons. It kind of seemed to fit the bill. So I put SpaceWorks on the internet, and it's not really a big, well-run website. Never put lots of time in that. But I'm thinking now with the lockdown to take some time and do that.
Yeah, because we all seem to have a lot of time on our hands at the moment. And another thing that takes a lot of time, of course, is advocacy for space. Because you mentioned before that obviously if you don't advocate and push for a particular target, it's very easy with political cycles and everything for it just to drift. So could you tell us a little bit more about what your experiences have been in space advocacy, for example, as part of Explore Mars Inc., and more generally, what role do organizations like Explore Mars play in increasing the support for Mars missions?
My experience as an NGO, and now I'm talking women's rights, is that however tiny you are, if you have something, a good idea, and you have a good way of, of articulating that, then even a very tiny organization can move the UN. And so I do believe that space advocacy, like we are doing and the Mars Society has been doing and other groups are doing, are very important, because one of the things is all our governments, at least in the democracies that we're living in, are supposed to work for us. So unless we tell them what we want, how do we know that they were working for us? And in a way, parliaments are kind of happy if you tell them, what the people want. And what we've done in America is in 2012, when I was speaking to Congress, people would say, whether it's a congressman or a senator, they would say, oh, yes, I am personally really behind space exploration with humans. Oh, yes, but my voters don't care. How do you know? Oh, we simply know. Well, my mom would say that's the wrong answer. And when I went from room to room, I realized that every time I asked this question, I got about the same answer, that they simply knew. And I said, what was the last time you asked? And they had no idea. And so we as Explore Mars looked into it, and it took many months to organize it, to get, help from the experts in setting up the questions, setting up the questionnaire, having a reputable organization send it out to volunteers, as each one of us can volunteer to be, fill out questionnaires. And so in the end, in February 2013, a survey of the American people went out over the internet. Within 2 days, we had more than 1,100 respondents. And so it became an official, scientific, valid observation. And the funny thing is, this was a gamble. We as Explore Mars had no idea whether the American population was really behind our idea. We could be those geeks who want to push something that nobody else is really interested in. It's a bit hard because, if you live in this group, you are kind of living in a bubble, and you don't really know what, the average Joe and Jill wants. And so we asked, and the answer that came back was 51% of the respondents were female, 49% were male. That was interesting to start with. And, and they were very well proportioned over age, education, wealth, where they were living, even, the heartland of America or the big cities. It was all very well proportioned. And the answer that came back was that 74% of the Americans said, sure, in 2033, because the question had been 20 years from now, will there be Americans walking on Mars? Yes, everyone was confident. 74% was confident or very confident that Americans would be walking on Mars. Oh, great. But, unless we put them there, it won't happen. And also then there were some other questions, and the more amazing to me answers, and also to Congress, were that we asked people, how much do you think, what kind of percentage does NASA get from the federal budget? And people, of course, had this inflated idea that it might be 10% or something. So we gave them a slider, and they could go from 0 to 6%, and the average was 2.47%. And then, because these questionnaires are online, your next window is then, it's 0.43% at the moment, which frees the guilt from people wanting to do this, knowing that it will not impede money sent to healthcare or to education or, to all these other things that people care about. they know that, okay, it's such a little money. That's the whole NASA budget? Yeah, okay. So then you start asking questions. And then the question came also, the answer that came back was also that if a human mission to Mars is part of NASA's assignment, we are okay to double the NASA budget, which would mean about $35 billion a year.
Yep.
Well, that's a lot of extra money. And we knew that for a Mars mission, you're talking to develop it and to develop it in time, you're talking about 5 to 7 billion a year extra, but not this doubling. So that's great. And then also we asked them, why would we want to go to Mars? Is it to show the world that exploring is the American thing? America is the leader. There were various reasons that people can tick the box. Strange thing is, 2/3 of them answered because we want to know more about Mars. So science for science sake. And that was on one of the other things that the whole Congress was absolutely convinced no American is interested in science. Well, think again. Now, the nice thing, if you do a scientific survey, is that you get this really, really thick report, like a telephone directory, and which tells exactly where people lived, who answered what. And then with this and the answers, you go to Congress, every congressional office, and you say, you know what? This is what your voters want. So in 2014, NASA had been given the assignment to put humans on Mars. And now every time we talk about money with Congress, it still is like, hey, remember, your voters are okay with a doubling of the budget. In 2016, we redid this survey. In 2018, Business Insider redid this survey without us knowing it. The numbers that came back from what the people would answer are about the same. So apparently this is how the American feels about it, regardless of what the economy is doing. And so, that's why we're really en route to Mars, because we proved to the people in charge, what we do the same in Europe. Because my bet is that a lot of Europeans are behind this as well.
That would be it. So, I mean, this survey that you mentioned, my attention was first brought to it from reading the Humans to Mars reports that Explore Mars Inc. puts out every year, which I would definitely recommend to all of you watching today. And I'll link to these reports down in the video description so you can find out more about this survey. Because when you hear the figures that most people think that the budget is, a factor of 4, 5, 6 times higher than it actually is.
Yes.
It makes it very easy for people to sort of think, maybe it should be higher than it actually is. Okay. And it's nice to actually see quantification of this. Yes. And I would love to see it happen in Europe and other regions in the world as well, to see this level of support. So for the last part of the show, and I should say to everyone, if you do have outstanding questions, please do fire them through in the last 10 minutes, and I'll take as many as possible. But I wanted to look at this idea of the composition of Martian society, which we mentioned briefly earlier. So how do we use the lessons that we have on Earth to ensure that society on Mars is fair, representative, it's equal, and that it represents, the best that we as a species have to offer?
Well, what I can tell you that right now in this pandemic, where people are losing their jobs, where people are worried about their health and whether they can pay for their health, not in America at least, in some other countries, perhaps many of us have health care, but not everyone. There is a talk, not just in Spain, about universal basic income, so that this whole pandemic economic consequences would be far less, and it wouldn't have been so hard to organize. Now, of course, universal education without payment for the education, universal health care is, it's on the table. And that's just because, we suddenly are in a pinch and we suddenly realize that perhaps the economics of everything is not as important as us human beings being healthy and happy and alive. And so I believe that with this knowledge that we actually at this moment already see happening, at least here in Europe, I believe that this is the type of organization, the type of society you could build in Mars, and it would be built on Mars for the same reason. Like we now in Europe suddenly understand that we really need everyone, and that someone who's cleaning the floors is actually bloody important to keep us all healthy and safe. And so it's not a lowly job, it's an essential job. And there are a lot of other jobs that have always people looked down on, and we now suddenly find, hey, you know, the girls and guys at the supermarkets are really important for us all. The farmers are far more important than many people feel often that they are. This type of society will be built on Mars for the same reason. You know, there will not be 1,000 people at the first landing. So we will need these small groups to survive. And even if we slowly build up, you know, this village of 100 or 200 people, we will still need each other so badly that we have a chance to realize that, yeah, it's not about your job. It's about the fact that you contribute to our society, to our communal well-being, that makes you a valuable and a valued, because that's another thing, society member. And I do believe that that's possible exactly because it will be so hard and so difficult to survive on Mars, because Mars is a very harsh mistress.
And I think even the kind of economic system that would arise in a society like that would be fascinating to look at, where every single job is vital for everyone else to be able to function. So you have someone in hydroponics who's growing the food that everyone else needs to survive. You have someone in engineering maintaining the life support system. But every single little skill set is so vital and important. And so I also hope that the education system that arises from this will inherently, for thinking further down the line for future generations on Mars, will teach people the inherent value of every single person to the society. Because if people don't work together and they don't contribute their shared knowledge, the society can't function in such a deadly environment. So I really do hope that Martian society will become more equitable, just because it's required to be able to function, just like we're seeing right now around the world. All these vital skill sets that perhaps people hadn't appreciated as much before are proving like night and day to be so vital.
I also believe that the educational system will be different on Mars. I mean, remember, the education system that we have right now stems from 250 years ago, when we suddenly realized as a society level of education to be good factory workers. By now, even, you know, before this pandemic, being a factory worker, more and more robots are taking our jobs. And, you know, in a way that's in the sense that you then not have a job and not have an income, it's bad. But in the sense that jobs that might be quite deadening because, you know, they're very repetitive, that we wouldn't need to do them as human beings is only good. And again, you know, a universal basic income would be good. And actually 2 years ago, the National Planning Bureau, which is an official agency here in the Netherlands, there was a lot of talk for a few years about universal basic income. It wasn't even in the programs of some political parties. And people kept saying, it's too expensive, we can't afford it. Okay, and then someone, you know, there had been people, of course, doing calculations, but then they wouldn't be believed. But now the Central Planning Bureau said, okay, we're going to, you know, really calculate. How much money are we spending at the moment on state pensions, on people that are on social welfare because they're sick or because they're unemployed, or all these other reasons that people are on, you know, government subsidies in a way. Well, those subsidies, we're actually paying taxes for them. So it's just, you know, a pumping around of your taxes. And they did the calculations, and they found that if they would give right now in the Netherlands, everyone of 18 years old and over, 600 euros per month and 600 euros per household. And how that works is, if you live alone, you get 1,200 euros. If you live with 3 adults, you get 3 times 600 plus 600, so 2,400 euros. And so the basic of your food and your roof over your head and some clothes and things would be covered. You wouldn't be rich. Nobody would be able to go to the Bahamas and buy a nice villa, not on this kind of income. but you would be able to survive without feeling the pinch of money as much as many people are feeling it now. And the whole system would work by everything you would earn over this money would immediately be taxed. In the Netherlands at the moment, there's like this level of money you can earn before income tax are being levied. And in this case, you would have gobbled up that income less, income tax less part of your income. And so they decided, yeah, actually the money we are spending right now in the Netherlands, if we would spend it differently, would be the system. Which then for me is like, this is crazy. Because why is it crazy? In the Netherlands, we have what we call a neoliberal government. What that means is that they believe that everyone is a crook. That's actually how they operate. Everyone, every single Dutch person, and I would think that includes them then also, is a crook. Everyone is also always fraudulent. If they fill out a form, they don't make honest mistakes. They just try to, get away with crime. Well, the strange thing is, of course, if you look at society, actually, most people are very decent people. And yes, a small percentage of us are crooks, indeed. And especially now in the Corona time, I can tell so many spontaneous, volunteer, free helping hands all over the Netherlands, and I believe all over the planet for each other. So this whole idea that people are crooks and people are bad is completely faulty. But because you have this system that they believe that everyone is always a crook, at the moment, a lot of money is spent on checking up on people being given government money. That's not just a waste of money and a waste of effort of the people that need to do the checking up, but it also is so diminishing to every Dutch citizen, not just those that have this government money, but every Dutch citizen, that, this is really needs something that needs to change. And I actually hope that from this awful pandemic, this is the good that will come. I really hope so.
I hope so too. And you really highlighted there about the inefficiencies which are built into the system. And that if you remove the inefficiencies, you can make a much fairer system for everyone in that process. And there are similar things like what you described going on in the UK. But I just wanted to switch to this question, which is just perfect for you with your background in languages. So we have a question here about whether there might be a Martian language that could develop, or whether we should deliberately create something. I know obviously historically there's examples like Esperanto that was created, but obviously you speak many languages, you have university education in this. So what's your take on this idea of a language for Mars?
That's a difficult one. I think I would be against a artificially grown language, because I don't think that works. The thing is, language is used to express not just, please go outside and put the bin out, but also all these emotions. And growing a language that really gives me the tools to express my deeper feelings, doing that artificially, I think will be very hard. My guess would be that if we go to Mars, there will be a universal language used. My guess would be, unless the Chinese are running the show, that it will probably be English. Like English is the language next to Russian, but English is the most important language on the International Space Station. Not because English is the best language, but because hell, we could choose Spanish. I mean, that's also a very large population group on this planet speaking Spanish. But it's more like, we've moved in society towards English. And sorry for me, the Dutch, who only about 30 million people on this planet know to speak Dutch anyway. And so perhaps not also the Germans and the French. I mean, for technologies, very often it is English. So my guess would be that it will be English, or a mix. Because let's face it, if we would send 3 Japanese and 3 English to Mars and we leave them there for 18 months, I'm not totally sure what language they will come back with. Probably a mix. Because in Japanese, there are probably some words that express feelings or an organizational skill set better than any other word in English. To be honest, English is a language rather poor for words compared to the enormous amount of words that are available to me in Dutch. So, and I'm not saying anything against English, but, every language has its ups and its downs. Like they say, there are 100 different words for snow in the language of the Inuit, and I will believe it. So it will work, but it probably will grow among the people instead of being, put there and this is your language.
Well, thanks, and let's take a few more quick points. Going back to our point there, someone's volunteering to be a Martian cave guide in order to get basic income on Mars. That would be a great job. I'm sure I would love to take a look at some of those lava tunnels in particular. Yeah. But let's see, what else did we have? Joe Flink was asking us to mention about incentive and frontier, as in, having the frontier on Mars can help us to innovate, etc. But one question I really wanted to point out, here we go, from Forks. So the question is basically about the legal system or crime and punishment on Mars. So you mentioned about a neoliberal system like you have in the Netherlands, treats everyone as a criminal already. Can we just trust people on Mars based on the crew selection? Such that we don't need to have a full-fleshed legal system? It's a very interesting question.
Well, with the fact that we have all these legal systems that are really based on the idea that people are, hell-bent on being crooks and thieves, I would love to try the other thing, to try to start a society where people trust each other and not so much punish each other as shame each other. Like, you need to do this because otherwise it's bad for all of us. Why are you not complying? Please explain. That's actually the system my Dutch government has chosen in this lockdown. It's not an official lockdown for a long, long time. By now, you can get fines if you're outside and have a party of 20 people or so. But until now, and even still, the idea is that they ask us to do what we need to do. They don't tell us. Being Dutch, I'm not sure it would go over very well if they told us, because Dutch people are like, hell, nobody is telling us. There's even an expression in Dutch that's hard to translate, but it goes like, there is no one, damn it, who tell me what I must. That. And so why not go the other way? Why not try to go from the idea that people in most cases want what's best?
I really love that idea that on Mars, given that we have a fresh start, why don't we just start with the principle that, hey, maybe most people are inherently good, we can trust them, and especially given the society that we want to create, we want to set a good example with the very first generation on Mars for future generations. And I think that's a wonderful note to wrap up today's stream with. But are there any concluding remarks or anything in particular that you would really like to communicate to our audience today, Artemis?
Yes, what I would like to say about our society here on Earth, it is based on a couple of ideas by disgruntled men. I don't want to, be nasty to men, but that's just how it is, because females had a very hard time to be published for many centuries. Even nowadays, it's harder to be published. And so Hobbes, with his idea that people are bad, Keynes with his idea about, the way economy works, it's all nice, but it's their idea, their take on society. If you look at history, it's the take of man on society. It's not really written about how females felt about history and how females even take count of the years in their lives. And even nowadays, in the 21st century, women take count of the years in their lives by personal happenstances in their lives. Like, this was the year Aunt so-and-so died, or this was the year my brother had his first baby. And it's not so much, this was the year that Ajax won the soccer cup, because the external reasons don't care so much. Even I'm a historian. I thought about it and I was like, really? Is this the way I, as a historian, think about history? And I go like, true, my own history, I indeed count in personal, events and not in world events. And so if we look at our society and say, oh, we cannot do a different society, we're actually saying the 49% of this society, of this world that have the power and has had the power for nearly 3,000 years are right. The 51% that don't have the power are wrong. I don't think that's a good premises to start a new society on the next planet.
Exactly, and that's such a wonderful idea that with this fresh start that we have here, we can ensure that everyone from day one, regardless of their background, whether they're men, women, what country they come from, everyone can be involved in creating this society.
Yes.
And I love the opportunity. And I would hope that it's not just about what we create on Mars, but that by showing on Mars the society we can create, perhaps that will inspire people on Earth to see a better way of doing things. So thank you very much for that point. And so thank you for watching, everyone. We've just reached the 1 hour mark. Thanks for all your questions. And if you do have any lingering questions, please do post them down below. I'm still working on our guest for next week, but all I would say for now is you might recognize them from a very large YouTube channel. Keep an eye out on my Twitter feed for an announcement in the next upcoming days. But without further ado, we'll say goodbye for now and see you next week in the next Mars Bunker. Bye, everyone.